Welcome everyone to Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the show where I rank all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. I'm here once again with Corey Richmond. How's it going, Corey?
It's going good.
After the three pearls awakened those magical goddess statues, they used their magic to raise from the sea our next dungeon, the Tower of the Gods. And we kind of discussed the opening in our last episode. We had kind of this big, grandiose opening cutscene, and it's a big stage setter for the dungeon, which is this big, awesome set piece and total mood setter. That continues as you enter into the dungeon, and this epic music accompanies it. It gives it this sort of legendary feeling, you know. The theme of this dungeon is actually pretty interesting, I would say. It's another tower, so we've got sort of that tower progression.
I'm a sucker for a good tower.
It also sort of reminds me of Dungeon 8 in Oracle of Ages, where each level almost has its own sort of stage to it, you know what I mean? Like its own little section within a section.
Funny enough, another Oracle dungeon that it reminded me of was Ancient Ruins in Seasons, the kind of Indiana Jones type one, because this one's got a similar vibe of like you're doing stuff and it's almost like you're setting off traps and disturbing some holy spots and stuff.
Some of the theming ties into both parts of the dungeon, obviously like the overall vibe, but we have some uniqueness, I think, to each section. So on the first level, the one we sail right into, we actually have to use the King of Red Lions to navigate around the dungeon, which is pretty unique. We see some more water level gameplay here continuing through the series, as you know, the water on this floor sort of raises and lowers between two levels, kind of just going up and down.
I've thought about this back and forth because I think I've heard the complaint sometimes about like, oh, you have to, sometimes you have to wait for the water level. I kind of kept that in mind this time, and I never found it too egregious, but I actually think it's kind of clever because most of the time the puzzles you're doing are related to boxes and where they're placed on the ground, and you kind of have to be like, okay, well, this only works when the box is not being lifted by the water, or it only works when it is being lifted by the water. So I need to kind of pre-conceptualize how this has to be laid out, and then execute it, and then wait for the water, and then get my puzzle done. So I found myself appreciating that aspect of it instead of just going, hitting the switch, continuing to go. You need to think about it a little bit more.
It's sometimes more frustrating than it is fun, like just because of like waiting. There is an element of timing, but I feel like the puzzles are usually just stronger because it's about, oh, I have to like, once the water level's like this, I have to change it, and then when it's the other way, it'll be fixed. I almost feel like if there was like a sort of like a divine beast element where you could change it at a moment's notice, that could be good. And then you could incorporate, because the divine beasts even have puzzles where then you still have to do like the timing right, you know?
Yeah.
So I think you could still have that there, but I like the idea they're going for. Yeah. But yeah, it's not my favorite of the water mechanics, but there is some clever stuff in there.
They could have done it in a better way. I didn't find the timing egregious because anytime I like missed something, you really only have to wait a few seconds and then you get another go at it. But I can see why that could be frustrating for some of the puzzles.
I like that aspect to the floor. The actual like series of things you need to do to get, beyond this floor it's pretty straightforward, but you're kind of traveling between the different rooms, and the first room is this big open room with like backtracking, and there's you've got your optional map and compass side rooms. I appreciate that they sort of put them in these side rooms, so it really makes it feel more sprawling than it really even is, but it gives you a lot to kind of explore right away. You can go to both sides and go in some rooms.
All that you really have to do is like go and get the key on the far side, which to even get there you need to do the thing where you get one of those little pillars from one room and bring it to that central room and put it in the right spot to lower a giant gate, which conceptually, that's just super cool. Like from a cinematic standpoint, just lowering this giant water gate to open up this corridor. Something about this first floor area that I kind of want to bring up is how it incorporates those two kind of like statue pillar things that you need to place in the right spot. This is actually something that almost reminded me of something like Eagle's Tower from Link's Awakening, where you have these semi-permanent objects where their location in the dungeon actually matters, and you can bring it from one room to the next room. And I just thought that was really cool that you kind of have to like bring them to this specific spot, and it creates a beacon. Which, another little Easter egg that kind of blew my mind is it has the exact same glowing sound effect as the sunken treasure pillars out in the overworld. And I was like, oh, that's a neat little tie-in.
Interesting. I can see that. I guess I didn't get that while playing, because like you really do just like kind of bring it out and put it on the pedestal outside the room. You know, you don't like Eagle's Tower. You have to kind of like be sort of like aware of where everything is and how do I get the ball from here to here.
You definitely do just kind of take them outside of their room and then put them in the spot, which is most of the time like right next to the door or up a set of stairs or something. And I was thinking it would have been cool if it's like the locations for the pillars are in some elevated centralized spot in that big room that you need to get to, and it's like you need to clock those first and then be like, all right, I gotta put something here and go find wherever they are in the dungeon and then bring them back and activate it to open that next part. But I just appreciate that, because you don't really get that a lot in dungeons where it's like this object actually matters and you have to bring it to different rooms. I think just even conceptually, that's kind of cool to me.
There's more of that going on as we go up to the next floor.
Even just going up to that second floor, the way that you get there is by stopping the water flow out of a giant gaping mouth and then going through the mouth. That's so cool to me.
You also were talking about sort of the vibe of the dungeon. You were talking about setting off traps or like awakening these. I almost were like kind of thinking of these as like mechanisms that are like automatons almost. Like, you know, you have the enemies like the Beamos, the Armos, and the Armos Knights. You're entering in this secret sacred area that's like protected by all these like, it's almost like a magic tech, you know, that's powering these things.
That's something that we'll talk about even later on to the very end of this dungeon. But I was getting big Breath of the Wild Sheikah Tech vibes from some of the rooms in this dungeon.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like this is like one of the first games to have that sort of like those Sheikah lines.
It's like, this is a test for the hero. This is like a holy spot, and this is really just a trial for you to see if you have, you know, what it takes to get to the top and stuff. What I had mentioned earlier, that kind of reminded me of Ancient Tomb. In almost every room that you enter where it's like there's a treasure or there's something you need to get, you get into the room, you go and do that thing, and on your return, there's something that happens, like you're ambushed, you know, 4 choo-choos fall down from the ceiling, 4 electric chews fall down from the ceiling, a Wizrobe pops up, or the statues that you use to complete a puzzle wake up and start attacking you. And I just felt like, oh man, like everything in here is trying to kill me. And it felt a lot like one of those lift the statue and then the boulder comes down moments.
The statue theme, though, that continues here. We don't have just the enemies trying to stop us or the guardians. We also have these like little, they're called servants of the tower. We do a series of puzzles involving them, carrying them around or leading them or controlling them. You learn the command melody. They use those elements in different ways. It's pretty fun. You know, it's pretty straightforward, I guess. Like, it's a puzzle one way and a puzzle back way. Yeah. Like the other way. But then you have like those enemies coming out at you. But it sort of is neat. Like, you know, you traverse through the rooms in different ways, like with the statues, you know. It's
like, okay, now these guys follow me and I have to do this specific puzzle to get them out to the center room. And then when you get the command melody, which is in a pretty dope little cutscene where like a beam of light makes this tablet appear and then it just disappears once you're done. They probably could have done more of that, but I think it serves the greater theme of this dungeon pretty well. The last section has a scale section, and this is something, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time that the concept of using weight as a puzzle is implemented into the series. Besides, you know, generic stuff like putting pots on switches and stuff like that. You have to put, 2 statues on one side to offset Link's weight. And it also changes on the way back because now you have the extra statue. So you have to kind of counterbalance it, being like, okay, well, I need to put more statues then. And it's making you think. It's adding like a real world concept into the mechanics of the game, which I think is really cool. And it's not literally just a one-to-one thing. It's like, all right, this statue weighs more than these ones, and Link weighs about the same as these ones. It's just a really cool way to add that real-life physics concept into a game. And I think that's just another showcase in this video game of how the physics engine is kind of taking a step up from things that we've seen in the past.
We also get the dungeon item in the mini boss battle with Dark Nut.
Even though it does just become a standard enemy later on, I think the presentation of this is just really top tier and a lot of fun. And I ended up killing him with his own sword, and it was very satisfying.
I'll put my gameplay footage on here because I didn't even think about it when I was fighting this guy, but I really am starting to not like the prompt of the parry prompt. And maybe it's, for me, maybe it's just that I've done it so much that I kind of am in the groove.
I'm trying to still look at this, as with all the other games, with the lens of what if I'm playing this for the first time? What if I'm a beginner playing my first Zelda game or even my first video game? I don't know how many beginners of Zelda or video games would get to this Dark Knight and be like, wow, that was too easy.
It also depends on how patient you were and willing to even attempt to parry. There's a lot of enemies so far in the game that you can just kind of go ham on, start sorting it up. Even though they teach you about the parry, you may not actually have used it or recall it.
That really is kind of the bread and butter of how to beat those guys.
This is actually, maybe you could say, the first check against just slashing your sword. And then this, I will say, these guys, they get pretty tough when combined, and you're trying to pull off those parries and another one's hitting them. I'm actually kind of won over to that this is appropriately difficult. But if you look back at my footage, you'll see I just destroyed him.
Yeah.
Here we get the bow, which sort of, it gives you a little bit more that you can pick up. There's some side stuff you can get like right away. Obviously, it helps out with a lot of the enemies.
I'm always a big fan of the bow in Zelda games. I think this bow is among the best. I think it's in the top half of bows. And you don't use it for a ton of puzzle-heavy stuff in this dungeon, which sometimes, if the dungeon item isn't used in a satisfactory way in the dungeon, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. But I think it's appropriate in this dungeon because what it mainly is used for, besides making enemies like Beamos and those bubbles easy, it encourages you to backtrack. Because so far, something we haven't mentioned yet are that at this point, probably like 3 separate rooms in different parts of the dungeon, you've seen these big eyeballs sitting on the wall and being like, what the heck are those things? There was one back in the compass room. That is the first time that you will see a Wizrobe, is if you go back and backtrack across the room where you learn the command melody to the opposite hallway. There's a platform that brings you across the hallway, and in that middle hallway there's an eyeball, which will make another platform come down and you can go up there. When you come back into that room after getting the bow, across the hall, across the big gap, this weird bird-like magician thing pops up. And you don't know what it is, and you're like, what the heck is going on? But you know that you have a projectile weapon now. That's a great way to introduce that enemy if you haven't seen it before. And a great way to remind you, like, hey, you have something that can kill things from far away now.
I do agree, that it doesn't change things up too much from a puzzle perspective. While, every previous dungeon, I feel like the item has, and it's kind of incorporated with the other ones. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you sort of get it by going off the main path of the dungeon, which I think is cool, but also not really. It's off of a side room, but you literally can't progress.
Yeah, it's literally
until
it's
getting
linear. It feels not linear, but it's linear.
Yes, I feel like that could have been one where I feel like we could trust the players to maybe just have them another path they can go, and maybe lose track of that statue, but they really make it so you are like chaperoning that statue. You can't leave it too far behind. It's the backtracking that I really want to talk about. Once you get the bow, once you get all the statues together, you create this portal that goes up to the 3rd floor. Then just up there's just like a little, not even a puzzle, just kind of waiting for you to give you the boss key. Sort of just felt like, here you go, here's the boss key. And I was sort of like, that's it, because you had all those things the bow was teasing before, and I thought they were really good teases. Even going back to that 1st floor, that one really memorable room with the big eyeball, and it's like the other dungeons, and maybe this is what Wind Waker's doing, and I'm not on its level, but it's just for bonus goodies, which I like. I like there always being bonus stuff to go back and get, some treasure charts and stuff, but why not, stick the boss key in that room, so you have to kind of think like, what can I do with this? It's always just like, oh cool, like if you think of it, you can go back and get stuff, but it feels less rewarding to me, because it doesn't feel like, how do I get forward? Aha! It feels like you can always get forward, and then the aha is just like a little bit of side content,
For me, I kept playing through and having some of these same things, like with the boss key puzzle. You get up there and it's like the chest is on one side and you just need to do a puzzle with, you gotta like bring the statues across the room and hit all 3 of them to make the beam stop or whatever, right? And I also was thinking the same thing immediately as I'm opening the chest. I'm thinking, well, they could have done something more with that, like maybe do some backtracking or maybe put it somewhere else. And then right after the cutscene stops, the statues that you use to do the puzzle wake up and start attacking you. And I'm right back into that, oh, sweet, this is servicing the greater conceptual theme of the dungeon. So it immediately brought me right back. But I completely understand that the desire for it to be a little bit more complex than it really is. And I think what it comes down to is this dungeon is just one of those dungeons where it's taking you on a ride. And that's that's the type of dungeon this is. And tower dungeons tend to be like that a lot. Not always. This is definitely more of a thematic, almost theme ride kind of dungeon.
I don't know. I just felt like it was missing like one last thing. I don't think I do like the statues coming to life and attacking you like as one final, but I don't know. Maybe the dungeon is long enough, but to me, I felt like it's like the other ones where it's like, I really had a lot of fun, but I feel like if they just had this one extra touch, that it would be like for sure one of my favorite dungeons of all time.
Before the boss, it has another fantastic high concept, super cool thematic section where you're ascending a curving staircase on the outside of the tower. That's so cool.
That is very cool. When we get up there, coming to life from the wall, Godan. How would you say it? Godan?
I would say Godan, yeah.
Godan. Godan meets us face to face.
And this was the moment that I was the most like, that's literally Sheikah Tech. Like all the blue lines on the wall and stuff. I was like, this is super cool to see this stuff in a game before the one that everyone knows.
We got a bongo guy. That's how I would describe
a bongo like
this genre of enemy. And it's cool. You do the thing, you shoot the hands. They put eyes on them. And then you got to shoot him a bunch in the eyes. So much so, actually, you definitely run out of arrows in this, and he's got to,
and he snot rockets them out.
But then you hit the bomb in the mouth. So there's like multiple stages to this. I kind of like that. With him shooting fireballs at us, or like sometimes the hands try to make some attacks. You got to stay moving, basically, in this fight.
Bongo. It's like shoot the hand. And then there's like a big choreographed charge at you. And the thing there is like you got to put on the lens of truth so you can see him and shoot him in the spot, right? But this is like he's shooting fireballs at you. You're running around all over the place, and you got to shoot the hand.
But he's not bongoing you though.
No. That's true. You gotta shoot
It's
the
a little,
hand, the
little
hand,
easier in that regard.
the eyes, then he drops, and then you throw a bomb in the mouth, which that's something that we also learned, I think farther back in this dungeon. There was another enemy we didn't talk about where it's like those big statues that jump around and they open their mouths and you gotta throw bombs in there.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys are introduced in this one.
Knights, yeah, which is, you know, an upgrade from the Armos. So it's all very, it's all very consistent.
The tune is a banger.
The tune, we didn't even talk about the tune. Yeah, great stuff. Great music all around in this dungeon. When we beat him, you know, he gives us some well wishes, snots out a heart container. I love that.
I love, it's so good.
And opens up the path forward to the top of the tower. And here, this is quite a cool moment. You know, you use the grappling hook. We made it to the top of the tower. We hook onto that bell, and we start swinging. The bell's chiming. Open up a portal outside of the Tower of Gods that you know, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I guess the cutscene kind of continues. We're sort of out of the dungeon now, but you know, King of Red Lions says the gods have acknowledged us as a true hero, but our trial has only just begun. And we get in this portal and we head down below sea level.
We're approaching one of the formative video game cutscenes for me.
The music is playing. At first, it's a little like mysterious and spooky. There's some voices and chimes, and then there's some comedy with Link. He's kind of realizing he can still breathe.
Thinks he can't breathe. Thinks he's choking. And then he's like, "Oh, actually, I'm alright."
So I love it. It's silly. It's mysterious. It's kind of creepy, and it's pretty epic. And then we see that we're traveling to this castle that's completely submerged.
Yeah,
and
super cool shot of like the crest. The crest comes into frame, and it's like, oh dang.
I don't know if it's not like exactly the Zelda theme, but it's meant to evoke. You know, it's going, oh, you know, it has that weight of like the Zelda theme. It's definitely doing similar things musically. Mm-hmm. That I can't really describe that well, but then, you know, the King of Red Lion says, here's where we'll find what we need to defeat Ganon. But we're gonna stop here because we can kind of stop playing at this point.
Yeah.
And we will save some of that for the next episode. But especially because we're definitely out of the dungeon at this point.
Yeah.
But it's one great thing. This dungeon it's introduced and like ends in such a high, you know, note.
That's just something.
Story, you know?
That's just something I wanted to mention. It's like you can debate whether or not it's part of the dungeon, not part of the dungeon, and even discounting that cutscene going under the water. It's like to start a dungeon that it's a tower that rose out of the sea that you sail straight into. To start it that way and then end it at the very top, ringing a giant bell out in the middle of the Great Sea, making that portal appear. It's just a perfect bow on top of a super cool tower dungeon for me.
Mm-hmm. So where does it fit in for you with ranking it in the game, and I guess amongst the whole series so far? Is this your favorite in Wind Waker? Is it your least favorite?
Yeah, so it's definitely my favorite in the Wind Waker by far. I have gone on record previously, like a while back, saying that this is amongst my favorite dungeons ever. And I kind of wanted to check myself a little bit and reconsider things on this playthrough. And while there were some aspects that we were talking about that I think could have been done in a more satisfying way, I ended up still placing this very high. This slotted in at number 6 for me, just below the greats of Water Temple Great Bay, Forest Temple.
Wow.
Right below Forest
Okay.
Temple, it's at number 6, surpassing the likes of Eagles Tower, Skull Woods, and Turtle Rock, which is
Power placement.
Yeah, and it's like those were the ones I started at the top of Wind Waker and just I started at where I have Forbidden Woods and went dungeon by dungeon, thinking like, do I like this one more? Yep. Do I like this one more? Yep. Do I like this one more? Yep. And then I got to that group, and I started realizing like ones like Link's Awakening Turtle Rock, A Link to the Past Skull Woods, A Link to the Past Thieves Town, and Eagles Tower all have very similar elements to this dungeon for me. Like super cool. Like I made the Eagles Tower comparison earlier, definitely on a smaller scale with this one, but I think this dungeon does certain things better than Eagles Tower. And then with ones like Skull Woods and Thieves Town and A Link to the Past, some of what sets those so high is how the theme and the atmosphere informs the dungeon. And I was like, yeah, okay, I was thinking about that stuff a lot too while playing Tower of the Gods, so I think it's a pretty apt placement for me.
Well, this is where I think we're finally going to diverge a little bit, because we've almost been in like lockstep somehow. And I was first trying to think about where would I put it amongst the Wind Waker ones, and I think I really just like appreciated, it as as like you said, as kind of this epic, almost the whole dungeon is this sort of epic set piece with some really cool puzzles involved. But I've sort of been on like enjoying the sort of what we've had going already with the puzzles and the stuff like that. And I think we talked about the two ways they could have gone with the bow, whether it be like for maybe picking up a little something extra, or maybe having maybe just if the dungeon had like some one more like puzzle element to it. Like I feel like it just was like lacking a little bit for me, whereas like the other dungeons we've played, I felt like this is like something it felt more new as an overall gameplay element. I guess like the statues didn't really like, they were fun, they were neat, but it didn't like blow my mind. And then the water stuff was like it's my least favorite like water mechanic, I guess you could say, so far.
Yeah.
Not that it's not really meant to be compared to like a whole dungeon where that's its thing. But I guess like, I mean, what I'm trying to say is like there was the dungeon was just missing like one extra thing for me to like really put it over. But I did feel that it was like still like a fun kind of roller coaster ride that you're going on. And you mentioned the crypt or whatever from Seasons. That was like that's a good comparison of just like it's exciting. But for me, I didn't want to put it below like it's not my favorite, but I didn't want to go as low as below Dragon Roost. I felt like that was too far, so I kind of wanted to put it number 2 in the game for me, because sometimes I do feel like some of that stuff still outweighs it, and it's such a cool moment in the game, and it's still a lot of fun, So and I'm looking at my list. If you look, like Forbidden Woods right now on my overall list is, I feel like right now, currently, and I've said this before where other dungeons were higher, but right now, in the context of my list, I feel like it's sort of the gatekeeper of like what I think are like my current favorites, at least if you had to ask me so far chronologically, like just the top of the heap, you know what I mean? And Forbidden Woods is like, it's on the edge of it. It's still an early dungeon in the game, so it's a little bit harder. Just to say, like, I feel like that's still a pretty good ranking for this, and even this dungeon, even though it's going lower. I always just want to put my list in context, because I notice people are talking a lot about like their least favorite dungeons in the series, And if you're looking at my list, if you're going down to like Parappa Palace, like, that's still like, I still think that's a good dungeon, Like there's none I don't have a lot bad to say about. So just so people know, I don't know why I feel like I think it's because this is a very popular dungeon, but I have fond memories of it. But yeah, it's not my favorite. And I would place it even a little bit higher, but I was sort of looking at, for example, Ganon's castle was what I was hinting at earlier, where it's like, it's overall, it has a lot of things worse than this, but I think overall what that dungeon does too is kind of provides you with like this big epic sort of set piece, you know, like running down the tower, stuff like that. You know, it's not definitely not providing. Maybe it's definitely better than that though, because the room to room puzzles and that are horrible. So,
yeah, sure.
But you know, you get what I'm trying to say. It's not like, for me, it's not all around. But I definitely put it above that. I would probably put it actually right below Forbidden Woods. Like it's comparable too to Skull Dungeon, which is
that linear
definitely
gauntlet
going for
kind of thing.
like one thing after the next. Yeah, it doesn't crack the top of like my favorites currently, but it's still one I like. I like a lot, despite the you know, nitpicks and stuff that I've given it.
I figured this would be the one where our rankings diverge for Wind Waker.
Yeah, I was definitely, I didn't think it would go that high. I thought, well, I guess we'll see then what your later dungeons are going to be, because I feel like they have to surpass it. Just thinking, I'm trying not to, you know, give it all away, but I guess we'll see.
I mean, for me, it comes down to like what I'm looking for in a dungeon, and I think the dungeons that we've gotten so far in the Wind Waker have all been pretty diverse and had their own things that they were going for. And I don't know what type of dungeon out of all Zelda dungeons I prefer, whether it's like a big, you know, untie the knot, a bunch of locks, bunch of keys dungeon, or a puzzle box dungeon, or like a theme ride dungeon. But for me so far, I think this dungeon, out of all dungeons that we've touched on, is the pinnacle of how to do that linear kind of streamlined go on a ride type dungeon.
Okay.
And I was particularly for me, what made it, I don't think this dungeon has puzzles that are near the likes of any of the ones that are kind of around it in my ranking. And the reason that that's okay for me is that, like, that's not the main thing that it's going for. But even with that in mind, I don't think there's a bad puzzle in this dungeon. I think all of them are solid to great. And that's not even what it's trying to do for me.
It's certainly unique in the game. And the game does have a few dungeons that are unique for their own purposes, but this one feels very, that and I guess Forsaken Fortress, but this one, they both feel very deliberate in that they're meant to sort of change up, you know, what you've been doing so far, because you've been like collecting the pearls, and then now you get to the next dungeon and it's like you said, it's not enemy infested or anything. It's like a totally different thing, you know. It's not trying to like rid this evil of this curse. So like I feel like the dungeon is like kind of reflecting that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think, you know, I like having sort of a, you should have like diverse feeling in dungeons, and this game definitely has so far. Well, all right. This is a pretty in-depth ranking, but certainly deserved it. So and we left on such a tease, so I feel like I don't know, I'm pretty excited to revisit that storyline and see what comes next.
Oh yeah.
All right, Corey. Well, thanks again for joining me, and thanks to everyone for listening once again, and we'll see everybody in the next one.